Hey, welcome to my channel. I hope everybody's day has been fantastic so far. So today I'm just going to be reading off some Skinwalker stories that I found on Reddit. I tried to find some good ones for you guys. You can put this in the background whether you're studying, sleeping, playing video games, anything. But I appreciate you clicking on the video. Be sure to stick around, like and subscribe if you enjoy it, and we'll get right into our first story. Our first entry is on r/no sleep by a boy named Pseudonym. I'm Dinye, Navajo, and boy have I heard a lot of stories growing up on the reservation. While I've never seen anything myself, which I am grateful for, I have benefited by being around the people who have. There is a different kind of evil that exists in the quiet high deserts and deep sandstone canyons of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, even Colorado in the southern Ute area. I can only describe it as an ancient evil. Now, there are helpful ceremonies, rituals, and traditions that are still practiced to this day. Hell, even a local hospital has an on-duty medicine man, but it seems to be a double-edged sword. What I mean is there is also black magic, which most Dinye will not even acknowledge or speak of. We are very superstitious and are heavy with taboos. You will find this with most First Nation people. From Alaska to Argentina, it's just something you don't do, in fear that it will get attention of unwanted spirits or harmful beings. Skinwalkers are just a few stories that keep me up at night, with the covers over my head. Here's a quick one for you guys. A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lightly snowing, maybe 1/4 of an inch, which is a lot of snow for home, and he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there, or where she was going, was not apparent, because she was so far out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't see her right away, but as he passes, he noticed that she is dressed in traditional clothing, a shawl, dress, moccasins, and her hair in the traditional bun. Not too odd. Many elders still choose to dress traditionally. But why was she out in such cold weather this late at night? Hitchhiking, maybe? He passed her too quickly and now has to turn around. And as he makes a U-turn, he notices that she is nowhere to be seen. This is fairly flat terrain, and he for sure saw an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with his flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footprints in the shallow snow. He follows the footprints until they suddenly turn into what look like dog footprints, leading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with another officer near his patrol. He is a little shaken up but asks the other officer if he has ever seen anything like that. The officer tells him that he has. He also explains that sometimes it's an old woman, sometimes a very beautiful young girl, but always on that road and always in the snow, waiting for the right good Samaritan to let her into their car. I still get nervous driving those wide open spaces at night. I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I rarely pick up hitchhikers, but I never pick them up at night. This story is by Cycloned Mind on r/no sleep. Camping Alone, Skinwalker Story. As the last flames licked across the fire and faded, leaving a warm glow from the embers below, I drank the last warm swigs of my tea from my canteen and thought about heading to sleep. The stack of firewood by my camp would remain unburned until the morning. My camp was a tarp tied up with paracord to the surrounding trees. It was basic, but lightweight and easy to carry on hikes. I had built a wall from fallen deadwood held between wooden stakes around the camp to deter any predators. I fumbled for the zip on my sleeping bag in the low light and eventually found it and unzipped it. I took off my boots and prepared to get in, very tired from the day of walking and wood cutting to make my camp. As I climbed in and closed my eyes, I heard a sudden noise from the treetops. It sounded as though every bird in the woods was flying away. A great flapping of wings and the odd squawk of warning prompted me to open my eyes. The embers from the fire were dull now, meaning that I couldn't see any of my surroundings. I have spent a lot of time in the woods, and know that it would take a very large predator to spook roosting birds enough to fly away en masse. I lay still and tried to listen, but I could hear nothing but the fading flaps of the birds' wings. They weren't nesting again, they were leaving the area. I heard the last of these noises, and then nothing. The woods were silent, eerily silent. I don't know if you have ever spent a night in the woods, but for the first few times, it is quite scary due to the various unexplained noises. Nocturnal animals prowling about, owls and rodents all make up the nighttime ambience of the woods. Over time, though, these sounds become comforting. There was nothing, no noise whatsoever. I sat up, still unable to see anything. I quietly reached over for a log to place on the embers. They were still hot enough and the log dry enough that they would catch. As my hand found a log and I began to lift it, I heard a branch snap nearby. I had made my camp in a clearing, so as not to fall victim to loose tree branches falling in the wind, but all around me was dense, unkept forest. The only path, the route that I had cut out to reach the clearing. The noise came from the path. I sat frozen, log in my hand, straining to listen. There came another crack of a branch. This did not sound like sticks breaking, but a large crack, like a branch being trodden on. This has to be a large animal to make such a noise. I strained to see in the darkness, but the embers, while low, still inhibited my night vision. It was then that the smell hit me, an overpowering stench of decay. I gagged a little, trying to remain silent, not wanting to attract any attention to my camp. I then heard a shuffling. Whatever this creature was, it was taking the path I had cut. I heard it brushing against the leaves overhanging the trail, the rustling of the low-lying leaves of the trees. Whatever it was, the creature was big, at least 7 feet, judging by the height of even the lowest trees. I noticed my breathing becoming heavier and tried to force myself to take controlled, quiet breaths. The smell of death in each breath was so thick that I could taste it. That's when I saw the shadow, the unmistakable shape of a deer. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling silly to have been so frightened by such a common woodland creature that I have encountered so many times before. It stopped moving, and the silence returned. So silent it was almost deafening. It was then I noticed that I could only make out 2 legs, hind legs, but the shadow continued upwards. This deer was stood on its hind legs, its back stretched straight, its front legs and paws hung at its side. This was no deer. My mind suddenly went into overdrive. I consulted a mental image I had made of the area before the light had died, and it was surrounded by dense woodland. Impossible to run through at night without seriously injuring myself. The only way out was the path that the creature was stood on, still unmoving. I had not been hunting on this occasion and had not brought a gun with me. I was only camping for 2 days, and so had enough food and drink with me. I had a large knife, but this thought did not fill me with such hope. I decided that I would scare it away with fire. I dropped the log I was holding into the pit of embers, pushing into them a little past the cooler embers at the top. I quickly placed several more around it and then hurriedly felt around the pitch-black floor for sticks. I found a few twigs and threw them on. One of the sticks caught, and a tiny flame shot up from the fire. While small, it illuminated the clearing enough for me to see the creature standing at the end of the path. I could not make out details, but I could see its shape and its antlered head, which was sniffing the air in my direction. The other twigs caught, and I saw it. It had the body of a deer, but its flesh hung from its bones. It looked as though it had been decomposing for a while, and yet here it was trying to get my scent. It had the body of a deer, but its flesh hung from its bones. It looked as though it had been decomposing for a while, and yet here it was, trying to get my scent. Its torso was upright, its broken ribs exposed through the rotting flesh of its chest. The head was the most disturbing. Much of its skull was showing, but its antlers had remained intact. Its head hung to its left side as if its neck was broken. Its eyes, or the space where its eyes had once been, reflected a bright red in the light of the fire. It looked as though there was something inside it, wearing it like a costume. It opened its jaw, and head hanging to one side, it let out a scream. The noise was nothing like a deer, nothing like I have heard from any animal I have ever seen. I felt it all the way through me, a long, undulating noise, high-pitched and shrill. My skin felt like ice, and I remember screaming "run" in my head. All care for the dangerous terrain surrounding me gone from my mind. I couldn't move. I was frozen, sitting in my camp, staring at the monstrosity before me. It took a step toward me when two of the logs caught fire, flames leaping up. The creature stopped and swung its head around to look at the fire, then back at me. It was at this point I thought I had a chance. The fire seemed to have scared it. I was wrong. It launched itself at me with amazing speed, probably only 20 feet away now. I finally found my ability to move and jumped up and sprinted in the other direction. I reached the tree line and without looking back, I jumped into it, holding my arms up in front of my face to shield my eyes from the many sticks and plants. I didn't make it far. I ran into a large branch and fell over. I wanted to look behind me, but I could not bring myself to. Instead, I scrabbled underneath the branch and started running again the other side. I hit 3 more branches in the darkness, and the last one hit me in the chest and winded me. I lay on the ground trying to catch my breath, thankful that I could no longer taste the awful taste of rotten deer flesh. I tried to breathe quietly, trying to listen for sounds around me. The woods were still quiet, but I could hear periodic crashes of a very large creature, presumably searching for me in the darkness. The crashes were off in the wrong direction, though, and seemed to be getting further away, not closer. I lay in the spot for what felt like eternity, but was probably about 2 to 3 hours judging by the light. I finally heard a little forest critter scurrying through the undergrowth, then another, then an owl hoot. It was clear that the predator had left the area. I didn't go back to my stuff. I stood up and headed straight for the nearest edge of the woods. I picked up a large branch as a weapon and slowly picked my way through the woods. I reached the exit at what looked like around 4 a.m. The sun's starting to rise again, but not yet visible. I walked over to my car. It was just as I had left it. I opened the door, and as I did, a smell of rotten flesh suddenly hit me. I slammed the door, started the engine, and drove out of there. My wheels span on the forest floor as I revved the car too hard. I didn't care. I just wanted to be away. I glanced in my rearview mirror, just as I was leaving the parking area, and saw it running across the middle of the car park behind me. Its running looked awkward, yet it was still so fast. I put my foot to the floor and didn't look back again. I don't go camping without my gun anymore, hunting or not. Our next story is by Cycloned Mine on r/nosleep. My House in Flames Skinwalker story. I glanced out of the window, trying to make out the woodland outside through the rain pouring down the panes. This has become habitual for me now. Around every 15 minutes, I subconsciously check the tree line. It's been 2 years now since my first encounter, and my life has changed dramatically. I keep a loaded gun with me at all times, although I am not sure how much it will help me. I cannot enter a deep state of sleep anymore. A part of my brain stays awake at all times, listening for danger. The creature has been following me since we first met deep in the woods, a memory that still haunts my dreams. sometimes waking up in terror, sweating. I could swear I can smell its putrid odor. I have been told that the creature is a skinwalker, a creature of Native American lore, often thought of as a witch. They are known to disguise themselves as an animal in order to get close to the people that they wish to harm. In my case, the abomination manifested itself as a deer, although its disguise was poor. A rotten deer carcass walking on its hind legs, its neck broken and hanging to one side. In the 2 years since then, I have had 4 encounters with this creature, but this story is about this night. Each encounter has been when I am alone. The sight and smell of the creature has filled me with terror like I have never felt before. I live alone in a cottage near a woodland. The trees border my property, and there is a small wire fence separating me from the woods. I glanced at the clock, 2:34 a.m. It is around this time I feel the most alone and vulnerable. About this time it usually shows up. I opened the window to see if I could see through the rain. The sound of the downpour filled my living room. Outside it seemed quiet, the noise of the rain hitting the trees the only sound. It was then I saw the shadow. It stood in the tree line, the only object not swaying in the wind. My stomach dropped, my heart beating faster. The familiar terror was creeping back into me. I slowly and quietly closed the window and locked it. I then circled my house, checking that all of the doors and windows were locked up tight. I loaded my pistol and took off the safety. I have read that guns cannot hurt a skinwalker, and I have never been able to get a shot off at it before, but it made me feel somewhat safer anyway. I turned off the lights and looked back through the window. The shadow was gone. I looked around frantically for any signs of movement within the trees. It was then that a loud, slow, rhythmic banging on the back door started. The knocks were heavy, rattling the door on its hinges. I let out a small yelp, unable to keep it in. I ducked down below the windows and crawled on all fours to the back door. The banging seemed louder, each knock jarring my mind a little further. I took aim at the door and pulled back the hammer. A pain spread through my chest, and I realized that I had been holding my breath. I took in a large breath and choked on the smell of putrid, rotten deer flesh, an all too familiar smell now. I gagged, and as I did, so the banging stopped. The cottage seemed deathly quiet. The rain had stopped abruptly, further emphasizing the silence. There was a loud noise outside the kitchen window. I turned to look and carefully stood up and peeked out the window. A couple of smashed roof tiles lay on the ground. It was on the roof. The fear was too much. I expected it to get easier each time, but in actuality, each encounter the terror got worse and worse. I started sobbing quietly. I thought about this thing following me for the rest of my life, and the thought was unbearable. I heard a window pane break upstairs. It was inside. I heard its heavy footsteps through the ceiling. It was searching through the rooms upstairs. It wouldn't be long now before it found me curled up on the kitchen floor sobbing to myself. I looked at the loaded gun. The stairs creaked. It was heading downstairs. The handle of the door leading from the stairs turned. I raised my pistol. The door flew open, and there it stood, its smell enveloping me. It was wearing the same deer. For 2 years, the same animal in the same state of decay, walking on its hind legs, its front legs hanging at its side, its head hanging to its left side. The sockets where its eyes were glowed red. The first time I believed it to be a reflection from my campfire, but every time its eyes had the same dull red glow. I meant to fire 5 of my 6 shots at the creature, saving the last for myself, but in fright I squeezed the trigger once too many. 4 of the shots hit their target, the others were wide, hitting the wall and the door. The sound of the shots were deafening in the small room. The smell of cordite faint behind the smell of the creature. It didn't even flinch. The bullets hit their mark. I could see the flesh wounds. Heard the dull sound of the bullets impacting flesh. It looked at me for a moment and let out its familiar scream, high-pitched and undulating at the same time. My blood felt like ice. I made a desperate sprint for the garage door. I flung it open and stepped into the dark garage, slamming the door behind me. I leaned with my back against the door as the creature struck it. The force was so great I fell to the floor. I leapt back up and turned the key in the lock. It began hammering the door with such force I was sure that the door would break from its hinges. I looked around, my eyes darting from object to object. I saw a gas can and a blowtorch. I decided to burn it, try to end this once and for all. I pressed the button on my remote to open the garage door, flung open the car door and inserted the key into the ignition and turned it. The car sprang to life. I reached for the gas can and fumbled with the screw top, my arms shaking and my fingers not obeying my commands. I poured a pool of gasoline by the door. I picked up the blowtorch and clicked the button. The blue flame seemed so bright in the darkness. I tossed it into the pool of petrol and it ignited just as the door was forced from its hinges. I leapt into the car and without even shutting the door, put it into drive and slammed my foot to the floor. In my mirror, I saw the creature stood in the doorway. The remaining fur on its rotten body was alight. It seemed not to be concerned about the flames leaping up its body. I hoped with all my heart that it would burn to death in my house. As I drove down the drive, I kept glancing in the mirror, watching as my house and all of my belongings went up in flames. I lost sight of the creature, but my whole being was praying that it was dead and I would not have to live like this anymore. Later that morning, I stood on the steps of my house, the flames extinguished. I explained what had happened to the fire service, but they looked at me with disbelief. As a courtesy, they checked for animal prints around the house, but found no signs that the creature had been there at all. The insurance company would not pay out as it was concluded that I started the fire. I am now staying in a hotel far into the city and away from the woodlands. I still do not know if it perished in that fire, although no body was ever found. I still cannot rest. I still check the windows. I am not sure how much longer I can live like this, how long I can carry on living in fear. No one will believe my story, and I have been forced to attend counseling due to me burning down my own house. This story is by GoAway1290 on r/scary stories. My encounter with a Wendigo/Skinwalker. So for context, I live in West Virginia, and in particular, I live in a rather secluded part of the state, so I'm surrounded by trees and such. I have lived here all my life, and I have heard many stories about the Mothman and other cryptids like Skinwalkers and Wendigos, and with me being one of the oldest of my siblings, I simply dismissed these folk tales. But I would soon be wrong, because in these following days, I would be terrified, fearing for my life, and stalked by this supernatural creature. I am 17 and was home alone for a good bit of my summer vacation. As it was getting late, I had to go and turn off all my lights in the farmhouse. And as I was doing this, I happened to look out the window into the tree line. I saw what looked like a pair of glowing eyes, so I took off my glasses, rubbed my eyes, and checked again. It seems that I was seeing things, but little did I know, I indeed was not, and this thing would soon be the bane of my existence. The following morning, I woke up and proceeded, as I normally do, like checking the barn, the cattle, the horses, and whatnot, but to my surprise, a few of the cows were missing. I simply told myself that I must have miscounted the previous day, but I noticed something strange when I was making my rounds. Some of the fencing was broken down near the cows. I saw tracks leading in and out of the cow pen, and these tracks did not belong to any animal I was familiar with, and I know what tracks belong to what type of animals. So I simply thought it was a mix of tracks like cows, coyotes, and wolves. But out of curiosity, I followed the tracks as best I could, leading me deep into the woods, about maybe 50 feet from the fencing. And as I was in those woods, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me and my every move. I looked around but saw nothing but trees, so I thought that I was just tired from not getting enough sleep last night. I then proceeded to walk back to the farm and put up some temporary fencing like chicken wire, so that later I could come back when the rest of my family was home. Later that night, I decided to go on a walk because I needed to clear my mind, as I had just had a rough argument with my girlfriend. So I took out my phone and headphones and listened to my music as I walked in the forest. But as it got darker, I realized I was so deep in the woods I couldn't see anything or even recognize where I was, so I took my phone out and used the flashlight to guide my way back. As I was making my way back to the farmhouse, I thought my flashlight caught something in the trees. Something like what I had seen the night before. But before I could get a closer look, it disappeared just as fast as they had appeared. Even though I'm 17, I was still freaked out, so I picked up the pace. I tried to hurry out of there as fast as I could. As I was doing so, I was taken by surprise when I heard a loud howling noise over my music. So I paused my music and took out my headphones, and there it was again. The same howl, but not a normal howl like from a wolf or coyote. This was more deep and scratchy, like if you were trying to yell with a sore throat. And it made me stop in my tracks, freezing for a few seconds. I could feel my heart in my throat as I slowly looked around, trying to see what could have made that noise. I saw nothing but trees. Then when I was looking with my flashlight, I realized that it was quiet, eerily quiet. And what broke that silence was a twig snapping not even 10 feet from me. And it was at that point my fight or flight response kicked in, and I chose flight. I then proceeded to run as fast as I could, given that I wasn't the most athletic, but I had to try because I was truly scared at that moment and was fearing for my own life. After running for what felt like hours, I could finally see where the forest ended and saw the farmhouse lit up from the lights I had yet to turn off. As I exited the forest and hopped over the fence for reasons I still don't understand, I looked over my shoulder to see if anything was following me, and to my horror, I saw a pair of dark glowing eyes, higher than any normal human height, and me being relatively tall, it freaked me out. I stumbled backwards and tripped over myself while keeping eye contact with this creature. He didn't come any closer because he stopped at the tree line, but I could smell him, and it was putrid and vile, like a rotting corpse mixed with eggs you left in the sun. I know that I wasn't the only one who saw and smelled this tall, dark, human-like figure, because the cows were going crazy. But I eventually got them to calm down, and I went back to the farmhouse and turned off all the lights. And when I walked out onto the porch, I took out my binoculars and looked to the tree line one last time to see if what I saw was real, or if I was just tired and hallucinating. But there he was, looking at me with those glowing dark eyes. My heart went into my throat, and I stumbled backwards, slamming the door and locking it. I ran up to my room and took the shotgun out of my closet, loaded it, and kept it under my bed for peace of mind, and tried to sleep, but it was hard because every time I closed my eyes, his eyes appeared. Eventually, I fell asleep, because I woke up the next morning to the roosters and my alarm. So I did my normal routine, but this time I took my shotgun with me, just in case. And as I got to the broken down part of the fence, I saw that the wire I had put up previously was also torn, and that blood was on it, and the ground, probably from a cow it took. I say it because I do not know what I saw last night, but soon I will come face to face with it. I walked into the tree line maybe 10 feet and yelled out, "I do not fear you, you cannot hurt me," in a firm voice. And in response, it let out this blood-curdling howl-like screech, and I yelled back as I proceeded to run out of the woods and back to the farm, not looking back this time. This was my biggest mistake, however, because come nighttime, shit hit the fan. Come nighttime, I locked almost every door and window I can think of and hid in my room with my shotgun. And for 10 minutes, it was silent until I looked out towards the tree line to try and see it, but it was closer this time, maybe 30 or 40 feet from the farmhouse. And I knew it had saw me because I locked eyes with it and I quickly ducked down. Then I got back up. It was even closer, maybe 10 or 20 feet, and I opened the window yelling at it, showing it that I was not scared of it, but it just stood there looking at me. I then proceeded to close the window, lock it, and pulled the curtains over it, as to not give it any attention. And what felt like hours passed, but soon, after I heard banging at the front door and what seemed like all around me, as well as inhuman screaming and screeching, until I heard all the windows downstairs simultaneously shatter. And at that moment I thought to myself, this is how I die. What happened next still feels like a dream, but from what I can remember, I heard animal-like noises coming from downstairs, and I vividly remember the blood-curdling howling and screeching it made. I then heard hooves coming upstairs fast, and I was genuinely fearing for my life at the moment. As it got closer, I could smell it again, that putrid and vile smell like rotting flesh and eggs that were left in the sun, and it was so strong that it almost made me throw up. I had to cover my mouth to not puke and to conceal my breathing, but that didn't matter because it had my scent and found the room I was in. It was at that moment it banged against the door, and I ran to the door, dropping my shotgun in the process of trying to hold it shut. And it kept banging and scratching and screaming. I held it with all my strength until I looked ever so slightly to my left at my dresser. I thought to myself, I need to get this in front of my door. With all my strength, I pushed it in front of the door, which bought me some time, but God knows it wasn't enough. Even with the dresser on its side against the door, it kept on banging and banging. As my mind and heart were racing, I considered my options. I could jump out the third-story window to my death, or I could go down with the fight, and that's exactly what I did. I waited in that room until it burst through the door, howling and screeching, and I aimed my gun at its ugly, wretched face, but I can only describe it as a half-human and half-deer skull, with the skin on it and antlers about 3 feet in length, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. I then racked another shell and pulled the trigger. I reloaded my shotgun and fired off another 2 shells as it howled and screamed so loud that my ears hurt. I thought they were going to bleed and burst. But I kept on shooting until it eventually backed off and I could hear it running down the stairs, howling in pain and leaving a blood trail behind. I followed it through the hole it made in my door, chasing and shooting it with my pistol I had in the back of my jeans, and kept shooting and shooting. I chased it into the tree line, and that's where I stopped, as I yelled at it, showing that I did not fear it, that I was more powerful. As I walked back to the farmhouse, I heard it let out a howl, but not of anger or rage, but more of defeat. It started to rain as I went onto my porch, and to my surprise, nothing was broken in my house except my door, which had a big hole in the middle. When my parents got home the next day, I simply told them that I was the one who caused the hole in my door because I was in a fit of rage, and they believed it. Even if I got yelled at, I know that I kept my family safe from whatever that creature was, but that was 2 years ago, and while I was still living on the farm. I have since moved out, and now I am attending college. I keep in touch with my family, asking if they have seen any unknown tracks or if they have heard any strange noises. To this day, I still wonder if it's out there waiting, until I return to the farm so it can get its revenge for what I did those years ago. This story is by antler-like on r/Skinwalkers. Petrified and looking for opinions. I have been a skeptic ever since knowing of these things. I have avoided saying the word in the subtitle, and whenever they're mentioned, I abruptly stop the conversation and do everything in my power to distract myself from the word, in order to prevent them from being driven towards me. For this reason, I'll be using the word creature instead. Frankly, I'm not entirely sure if this thing really was a skinwalker. Could be something similar, but I digress. These are one thing I have consistently avoided since adolescence. At writing, it is 3:11 a.m. This occurred about 20 minutes ago. I was on my way home from a friend's place, a bit groggy, and feeling a bit down. I live about 30 minutes away in a small rural area. I try to keep good eye on the roads at this time, as we live in deer country, and I don't want to hit anything. Throughout the drive, I did so like normal, and all was well until turning off the highway into the road leading to my house. There was a large, low-visibility hill right at the intersection to said road. As I crossed the horizon of the hill, there was the creature, sitting motionless, tongue out, staring at my vehicle. It took the form of a dog, sort of brown and black, splotchy. However, I am 100% certain that this was not a dog. Its eyes were large and lifeless. It did not move. Only a twitch of the ear was visible. That's the only way I knew it was real. It was hunched over like some sort of gargoyle. Initially, I went to honk at it, but as some of my fingers grazed my horn, I was paralyzed in fear. I couldn't fucking move. It was just there, hauntingly staring. It was the eyes, the absolutely ungodly eyes. Dread consumed me, and I hit the gas and turned onto the road. This is a gravel road, mind you. I sped all the way home, about 4 kilometers away, and I've locked myself in my room ever since. I can't move, and sure as hell can't sleep. I don't understand why this creature was drawn to me. Perhaps my avoidance drove it closer? Nonetheless, I'm absolutely fucking petrified, and certain that thing was not a dog, or anything of the sort. I apologize if this writing is poor. I am terrified and not thinking straight, and sure as hell not going to sleep anytime soon. Any thoughts would be great. For a little more information, I live near the Rocky Mountains, if it helps. The Encounter by Vincent6273. This is meant to be a cautionary sharing of the encounter I had, and not to speak, joke, or disrespect the names of certain beings or whistles at night. You probably know what I'm talking about. This is a true story that my friends and I experienced, and I would like your thoughts on if we encountered one. We used to joke about the name of a certain Navajo legend, using it to scare our friend who had no idea what it was when he got high. Admittedly, at the time it was funny. However, that all changed on Friday, June 13th between the hours of 2 to 3 a.m. No, I'm not joking about the time or date. A group of friends and I were hanging out in a cul-de-sac that borders a large hill where no houses are. The hill is surrounded by houses all along its borders, but a large chunk is only brush and trees with trails. Less than half a mile away is a large nature preserve bordered by mountains that lead to Black Star Canyon, California. My friends wanted to smoke some weed and were being a bit loud. I didn't want to disturb my neighbors, so I suggested we walk up the trail a bit and smoke there. While on the trail overlooking the houses, we heard a loud snapping sound, like a tree branch snapping, not like twigs. We heard this sound around 10 or so times in irregular intervals over the course of around 15 minutes. My friends didn't pay much mind to it, but I was focused on it. I didn't smoke, so I was sober through all of this. While listening to it, I thought a name. Eventually, we decided to go back to the cars and closer to the houses. Then, while walking at the end of the trail, we heard a loud crying. Sounded like it could have been a child. The crying was loud and went on for more than 10 minutes. By this time, we were at the cars, talking about the crying. The time at this point was probably closer to 3 a.m. Then, while we were talking about the crying, I heard some twigs snap in the brush on the hill behind the cars. I turned and looked, scanning the hill. I thought I saw something move, but it could have been the breeze moving a bush. Then we all heard a quiet, quick whistle from the hill. I turned to my friends and asked them if they heard that. Then when they said they did, I then asked if any of them did that. They all shook their heads. When we realized this, we ran into the cars and drove down the hill. I live on a large hill, to the parking lot of a CVS. While there, we all got into one car to talk about what happened. We then saw a coyote cross in front of the car maybe 100 feet away, look at us, and then it left. I've taken this experience as a massive warning never to play around or disrespect its name again. I went from a skeptic who only enjoyed subreddits like this, and listening to horror stories on the internet, to downright terrified to even think the name or be alone outside. The truth of the reality is, we are a bunch of 20-year-olds who just freaked ourselves out, but it was just a strange combination of events after fucking around, and we did find out. I urge everyone to not make the same mistake we did, joking around and saying the name. This is My Strange Encounter One Night by Useful Gain 9910. During my time at school, a few precarious circumstances landed me with no car. Because of this, I was forced to move to an apartment that would have put me within striking distance of my campus. Being that it was about a 2-mile journey, with my city's relatively small downtown falling in between my complex and school, I found it most rational to purchase an electric scooter as my primary form of transportation. My city ran alongside a river, and my apartment happened to border it. This gave me a nice view, but more importantly, it gave me direct access to the greenway that allowed me to circumvent all traffic on my scooter. It was a straight shot from one end of the city, my campus, to the other, where I lived. The greenway did have one flaw that regularly proved to be detrimental. There was almost no light for about a quarter of a mile in the section behind my apartment, and where I got on. My scooter was nice, but the headlight was abysmal. I resolved to cease using it entirely, instead relying on my eyes to be able to discern movement on the path ahead. During my year-long stay at Riverside, I could count on one hand the number of people I saw on the path after dark. Guess I was the only one crazy enough to be out there so late, so regularly. I drove past a naked homeless person tweaking about a mile from my house, calling the cops upon my arrival back home. I drove past one man whose chilling gaze could be felt even in pitch black. He must have not been too happy to see an electric vehicle with no lights at such hour, which I couldn't blame him for. Of the encounters I had on that path, there is only one that still haunts me. One I couldn't tell my friends or my family because I was sure no one would believe me. Like any other of my evening commutes, I made it to the gate in the back of my complex that led up to my home. I was confident in the dark, and I didn't fright easily, but as I unlatched the gate, I felt the sensation I had when that man was staring me down. I was being watched. Looking down the path to the section that lay ahead about 20 yards or so, under a flickering orange street lamp that signified the end of the greenway, was a German shepherd, staring at me. It was as if it had been taxidermied. I couldn't see it breathing or blinking, just staring. Its eyes were almost human. Despite the distance, I could easily discern its iris, small and beady. I felt frozen, and a morbid sense of dread overwhelmed me. I didn't dare get any closer, nor did it. We were locked within a mutual trance, and the entire time it was completely still. I wasn't sure how long I had been standing there, but I didn't take my eyes off of it. I felt like that's what it wanted. I knew my gaze was the only thing holding it in place. The river flowing and the sound of cars passing by on a nearby highway felt deafening. Further down the path in the foliage adjacent, past whatever that thing was, there was a crackle of twigs being broken under the pressure of what was likely a bunny or groundhog. Before the sound even finished reverberating, the thing had snapped its head to the direction of its source like an owl. Electrical pulses were surging through my body, and I could feel every nerve screaming at me to immediately break from my apartment. However, I was so paralyzed with fear that I kept my gaze upon the creature, knowing where it was the only thing providing me a sense of comfort. Then, after it had seemingly ascertained the location of the animal, it leapt up on its hind legs and darted into the woods. Like a bolt of lightning, it was gone, and it took a few seconds for the rest of my body to catch up to what my eyes just saw. Finally, realizing that the thing was fixated on something besides me, I immediately swung open the gate and carried my scooter up the mulchy hill onto the parking lot. In one motion, I turned it on, placed it down, and started riding to the side of the complex my apartment was in. I was on autopilot, focusing on perfectly executing whatever actions would lead to the security of my covers. Before I knew it, I was in my room. When I finally sat down on my bed, I felt like I needed to cry. I couldn't understand what had just happened, but with a million thoughts racing through my head, I was just happy the encounter was over. For the rest of my time at Riverside, I decided dealing with the extra traffic going through downtown provided was worth being in the safety of light. I could handle racing past crackheads and junkies, but I never wanted to see that thing again. I hadn't had another similar incident, and when I finally got another car after I graduated, I began to feel safe commuting again. However, I still live in the city. Noises at night make me feel uneasy now, and one time I could swear there was something tapping on my bedroom window. I don't think I'm ever going to be the same, and the confidence I had to take care of myself in the dark has all but vanished. There are things out there that aren't what they seem, things beyond our comprehension and understanding. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to be a hero. Trust me, it's not worth it. Our last story was posted on r/Skinwalkers by an unknown user. I've posted this one a couple times before, but it still seems fairly relevant. A personal experience that I had a while back. Still kinda messes with my head when I reread it. I'll be the first to say that all this stuff could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Sorry for the length. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car that he had willed to me to the cabin. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but felt the need to mention it anyway. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the unusual happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. Had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs/PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. Bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom, along with small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creep me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he also since passed, playing games and watching DVDs. That day it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and a very tall pine trees. Tall, this is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days I knew that no one was currently staying there. Gave enough background that I'm going to jump to the weirdness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I noticed that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints lead away from my cabin, and they disappeared into the snow toward the denser part of the trees. Disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill/listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed quiet. I was kind of freaked out, and could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit, well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier. But he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go to where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright, maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this, did not want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I went outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Must have it been all in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. By the way, I am shaking right now, and my heart is beating hard as I am typing this next bit. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between two branches. It was squatted on one branch, and its arms were extended above its head, holding on to the branch above it. Fuck me, what the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head, telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. Passed out eventually and woke up in the next morning, and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, so I was pretty fucked up from all the drama. If you made it to the end of the video, I just want to say thank you for sticking around and watching the whole thing. If you did enjoy, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll be posting more content like this every single week. If you want your stories featured in future videos, be sure to drop a link to your story in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check them out, and your story might be featured in my next video. But I want you guys to have a great rest of your day or night, and I will see you next time.